30 years after a mother was found strangled to death alongside a Las Vegas highway, police have finally identified the man they believe killed her. On August 27, 1994, two men were hiking on Lake Mead Boulevard when they discovered a woman's body placed in a washed area near the recreation area entrance. It was obvious she had been dragged there, police said. The Clark County coroner identified the woman as 27-year-old Melonie White and determined she had been the victim of a homicide. She had been strangled, police said, and also died from blunt force trauma. DNA of the suspected killer was recovered at the scene. White had moved to Las Vegas with her boyfriend in the spring of 1994, police said. When her family couldn't get a hold of her, they reported White missing. Her two brothers, Walter and Jason, said their sister had a son who is now 33 years old. They said at the time of her death, White was at a crossroads and was struggling with jobs and to find her place in the world. She was traveling back and forth between Phoenix and Las Vegas and loved fashion, Walter said. Melonie's family reported her missing after they couldn't contact her for some time, Las Vegas police said on Tuesday, October 22nd, in the news conference announcing the identity of her killer. Investigators at the time received many leads, and every one of them was followed up on. But ultimately, their exhausted effort did not identify the suspect. Police were unable to identify a suspect at the time, and the case eventually went cold. The case was reopened in 2010 when a DNA profile was entered into CODIS, a national DNA database that allows law enforcement agencies to compare DNA profiles to identify suspects, link crimes, and find missing persons. Still, police said investigators weren't able to find a match. 11 years later, in 2021, cold case detectives, with the assistance of the Vegas Justice League, sent the DNA profile to Othram Labs to help identify the suspect. On August 26, 2024, the lab notified police they identified the alleged suspect as Arthur Lavery, who grew up in the Las Vegas area and would have been 38 years old at the time of White's murder. Lavery died from COVID-19 complications in 2021. His only criminal history was a battery charge, said police. Police said many of White's friends had seen her the night before her murder in an area of Las Vegas near where Lavery lived. But they have not been able to establish a direct link between the two. Jason White, Melonie's younger brother, thanked the police department and the Vegas Justice League for helping bring the case to a close. It was a short conversation that closed the book on 30 years of not knowing what happened, he said of the call from police that let him know his sister's alleged killer had been identified. We will always miss Melonie and believe the solving of her murder will help bring a measure of peace to her and all of us, he said. Jason and Walter say many members of their family were broken as they mourned the loss of Melonie. They have now found closure with this news. She was just a really nice person. It's tragic, said Walter White. Madison police officials contacted their Vernon County law enforcement counterparts after a patient in a Wisconsin hospital told his nurse that he killed a woman in 1985. A nurse at a local hospital contacted police to report that a patient told her he was the suspect in an unsolved murder case from nearly 40 years ago in another county. Terry Dolowy, a 24-year-old finance student at the University of Wisconsin, who disappeared from her home in La Crosse early on Valentine's Day 1985. Her decapitated body was found 4 days later in a culvert on Mohawk Valley Road in Vernon County. Investigators said a patient at Madison's Mendota Mental Health Center told a nurse he killed Dolowy. The nurse then reported the information to the Madison Police Department. Vernon County Sheriff's investigator Scott Bierkos stated he's been on the Dolowy homicide case for 25 years. Bierkos said the man who confided in the nurse was a former friend of Dolowy's fiancée. Authorities at the press conference stated that Michael Popp, 60, faces a charge of first-degree murder. He was 21 at the time of the alleged killing and is a Tama resident. He has worked as a truck driver. Authorities reported that Popp was arrested Monday, September 23, 2024, and is in custody at the Vernon County Jail. His bond was set Tuesday at $1 million. Officials explained that advancements in DNA technology throughout the last several decades helped contribute to identifying Popp as a suspect. They did note that they are not relying solely on DNA as evidence in the case. Dolowy's fiancé, Russell Lee, reported her missing, and authorities launched an investigation immediately. Vernon and La Crosse County officials noted she had left her purse at home, she did not have her car and her dog was missing. When her body was found on February 18, 1985, officials reported her body was found decapitated and burned with the use of an accelerant. A pathologist collected DNA found in her body a day after she was found. Officials submitted the DNA for further testing on June 1, 2022, and linked Pop as a person of interest that September. Authorities conducted a DNA swab in January of 2023, and Pop was a match. In reviewing interviews conducted in March of 1985, authorities determined Pop and his girlfriend at the time knew Dolowy and her boyfriend. The report stated that they would go to pool tournaments together, oftentimes being partners, and Pop had visited Dolowy's boyfriend's home several times. Pop also lived near the mobile home park they lived at during the time she went missing. During an interview in 2022, Pop initially denied having a relationship with Dolowy. After the DNA swab came back, he allegedly claimed in March of 2023 that they had a brief affair. When asked why he didn't tell police that the first time, he stated that he didn't want to get in trouble because it was a serious case and he didn't want to be associated with it. When asked if he killed her, Pop denied it several times. If convicted, Pop faces a mandatory minimum sentence of life in prison. In 1984, a 69-year-old woman was attacked on the 300 block of Atlantic Street, dragged into an alley, raped and killed in Roseville, California. The 40-year-old cold case may have been cracked after a man was charged with homicide in June 2024. Madeline Garcia's brutal killing shocked Roseville residents in 1984. She was a beloved, eccentric figure known for riding around the city on a three-wheeled bike and handing out baked goods to neighbors near her Hill Street home. She was very kind-hearted, one neighbor stated at the time. She kept herself to herself except when she could do good. Madeline Garcia's parents immigrated to California from Spain when they were young. Madeline was born in Chico, though grew up partly in Rockland. The man she ultimately married, Frank Garcia, also came from a family of Spanish immigrants. As a young wife, Garcia spent years living in East Sacramento at a house on 32nd Street. She later moved to C Street. Garcia's granddaughters all remember her working at Midtown's Libby Canary. They even have a photograph of her walking a picket line during a strike there. Garcia eventually moved home to South Placer in the late 1970s. A week before her death, Garcia reportedly complained to her sister about a man who frightened her early one morning, near the location where she was later found dead on the morning of September 26, 1984. For decades, Madeline Garcia's granddaughters could only touch heirlooms from the past when reaching for the memory of a woman who was taken on that September morning. They have a Prohibition-era wedding portrait of Garcia as a young bride. They have the jazzy dress and feathered flapper cap she'd worn during nights on the town. They have the ornate society book tracing Garcia's family tree from California to Iberia. These things speak to a life that was real. For Roseville merchants, the woman those items once belonged to was an unconventional individualist, someone they referred to as the early riser or the can lady. But to those who were closest to her, those who still remain, she was Grandma Garcia, a Spanish-American homemaker who loved cooking, crafting, gardening, and putting a smile on the faces of neighborhood children. Terri McAdams is Garcia's oldest granddaughter. She was working for Sacramento City Unified School District on September 26, 1984, when her husband unexpectedly arrived at the office. McAdams remembers being told that she had to leave with him right that minute. When we got to my mom's house on College Greens, she came running outside saying, "Someone murdered Grandma," McAdams recalls. Then my husband drove my father to the morgue to identify the body. It was decades later when McAdams and her sisters learned just how merciless the slaying was. By then, Garcia's survivors had mainly lost hope about learning who would do the unthinkable to their grandmother. All that changed on the morning of June 27th, when Placer County investigators slapped handcuffs on 59-year-old Richard Raymond Moore. The man had been living in Southern California, but he was no stranger to Roseville. Reports state that South Placer police noticed in the state archive from the fall of Garcia's death revealed that Moore was arrested for arson just weeks later, with that incident happening some 2.5 blocks from Garcia's murder scene and on the very same street. At the time of her killing, Garcia was a 69-year-old widow known for venturing through Roseville. On the morning that changed everything for McAdams and her sisters, A witness was coming down Atlantic Street and noticed Garcia laying on the ground, her body half concealed in an alcove behind the West House Hotel and Saloon. Approaching police found a scene of barbarity. Garcia had been killed by repeated blows, the force of which had sent her dentures rocketing away from where her body fell. Even officers who'd seen Garcia around Roseville before had trouble recognizing her, and she had been sexually assaulted. That was a question Roseville homicide detective James Fujitani was considering as he stood over Garcia's body. He and an evidence tech named Gary DeMille worked the crime scene exhaustively. Officers canvassed the downtown area, talking to men staying at the West House, as well as strangers in town hopping on and off trains. 5 days into the investigation, Fujitani had to pivot his efforts to a shocking double homicide on Oakland Avenue. The detective managed to get an arrest and conviction in those murders, but hopes of finding Garcia's assailant were starting to fade. Long after the case went cold and Fujitani retired, a noted homicide detective named Kurt Leatherman started pushing the investigation forward. Leatherman spent 10 years regularly aligning the evidence in Garcia's case with new forensic techniques and crime technology, while simultaneously zeroing in on and ultimately clearing a bevy of potential suspects. When Leatherman retired, the fattening case file that he'd built was handed to another accomplished detective, Mary Green. Between her time at the Roseville Police Department and a later promotion to head of investigations at Placer County DA's office, Green made sure that Garcia's cold case was not mothballed. The work by Fujitani, DeMille, Leatherman, Green, Harlan, Dutto, and others like DA investigator Ryan Ball all culminated in the arrest of Moore in Southern California. Investigators reportedly ran body fluids preserved from the crime scene through the familial DNA sifting method, the same sequencing technique that caught Joseph DeAngelo, Golden State Killer, as well as Roseville murderer Michael Green, whose unsolved crime had also dated back to 1984. DNA is what authorities said led them to Richard Moore. Richard was arrested on Thursday, June 27th, and booked into jail in connection with Garcia's killing. Neighbors who live by Moore in a quiet Echo Park neighborhood said they were in disbelief over the allegations, with many saying the man seemed friendly and helpful. Moore was transported back to Placer County, where he was charged with 1 count of murder, along with special allegations relating to kidnapping and rape. He appeared in court on July 8th for an arraignment hearing, where a public defender was appointed, and he entered a not guilty plea. Terri McAdams, a 22-year-old University of Texas at Arlington student, was found beaten to death inside her fiancé's apartment on Valentine's Day 1985. Investigators struggled to find her killer, but no arrests were made and the case went cold. On February 14, 1985, McAdams' body was found by a maintenance worker in the apartment that the Arkansas native shared with her fiancé in the 2500 block of Walnut Hill Circle in Arlington. She had been brutally beaten and sexually assaulted. McAdams' fiancé was out of town on a business trip, and she had planned to pick him up at the airport later that day. Detectives were able to eliminate him as a suspect shortly after the attack. The couple had planned to marry within months. At the time, detectives said McAdams' $5,000 engagement ring was taken during the attack. Police alerted area pawn shops to the missing ring at the time. Her alleged killer also left behind a distinctive shoe print outside her home, according to police. Police did not find a murder weapon but believed that the killer used a hammer or some other type of blunt instrument. At the time, a filtered cigarette found at the scene was tested for DNA. Homicide detectives worked around the clock for months. McAdams' parents offered a reward, pleading for help to apprehend the person who killed their daughter. McAdams had been scared by a series of killings and disappearances of young women in the Fort Worth area that made headlines beginning in 1984. Her mother, Ann McAdams, stated in 1985. Fort Worth police and other law enforcement in North Texas started a task force to investigate the possibility of one or more serial killers committing the murders. The college student took extraordinary precautions to try to protect herself, such as quitting her job in Irving so she wouldn't have to drive home after dark, her mother said. At night, especially when her fiancé was out of town, Terri became reclusive and rarely went out, even for groceries. She often called her mom in Little Rock to discuss her fears. She was terrified, Ann McAdams said in March 1985. All the girls who disappeared or were killed were about her age, and they were young, pretty girls. So naturally, being that far from home in a strange town, and something like that going on, you would be afraid. She was really careful about not going out at night, and she took every precaution she thought necessary. Her killer found her at home, according to police. Investigators found evidence that suggested the murderer broke in through a patio door. Police believe McAdams was killed on the night of February 13th or early on the morning of February 14th. She had gone to a store that day and was planning to bake a cake for her fiancé for Valentine's Day. McAdams' younger sister Karen Hopper says her family had come to terms that police would never find the person responsible for the brutal attack. Their parents have since died. In 2023, Arlington Police Department sought the assistance of the FBI's investigative genetic genealogy team to help work on the case through analysis of DNA evidence. Despite exhaustive investigations, police were not able to identify McAdams' killer until now. On Wednesday, August 14, 2024, Arlington Police and the FBI announced that DNA testing of a relative confirmed the killer's identity. The killer, Bernard Sharp, took his own life months after McAdams' death, police said. He shot himself after killing his wife and her friend and critically wounding her cousin. Police do not believe the two knew each other and say the attack appears to be random. Sharp, a registered sex offender who lived nearby, was one of dozens questioned but was never arrested. But now police say they have no doubt that he was the killer. McAdams' family is grateful the department never gave up. Investigative genetic genealogy is one of the most valuable tools that law enforcement has access to today, Chad Yarbrough, a special agent with the FBI office in Dallas, said in a statement. The murder of a teenager in the city of Logan that remained a cold case for nearly 60 years has finally been solved. Police announced Wednesday on the anniversary of the crime. Tanya Weber, a 17-year-old senior at Logan High School, was found dead on June 26, 1965, with her partially nude body found just blocks away from her home on West Street. At the time, an autopsy showed Weber had been strangled and that her death was a homicide. Rhonda Christensen was 14 years old at the time and still remembers when she learned that her older sister had been murdered. She and her family were attending a reunion in Idaho when police located them and told them what took place. The policeman came in and asked for my parents, explained Christensen. They took them outside and told them what happened. There was a lot of support from our extended family. Evidence collected from the crime scene included Tanya's clothes. The press release did not mention additional pieces of evidence. An investigation led police to interview about 1,000 people and collected statements from 150 of the interviewees, with 26-year-old Owen Hodges Kimball, who was in the area at the time of Weber's death, being identified as a suspect. However, on June 30, 1965, just days after Weber's body was found, Kimball was discovered to have committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning after his family reported him missing. Following Kimball's death, the Cache County attorney said there were no prime suspects to prosecute in Weber's murder, leaving the case unresolved. In 2022, Logan police reopened the case, with Weber's clothing being examined for DNA analysis, which discovered a mixture of several males' DNA on her clothing. An order was signed to exhume Kimball's body, which occurred on November 2, 2023, to collect DNA samples from his remains. Testing conducted by the Utah State Crime Lab and an independent lab in Virginia discovered Kimball's DNA on the clothing Weber was wearing when she was murdered. After reviewing the new evidence, authorities confirmed that Kimball did in fact kill Ms. Tanya Weber, and this evidence would be sufficient to obtain a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. Police wrote in a release Wednesday, June 26th. Logan police have remained in contact with Weber's family through the latest investigation, saying they hope this information provides them closure. Lieutenant Lemuel Earl was one of the lead investigators on the case all those years ago. He's been retired 24 years now, but said it was a case he could never get out of his mind. My primary role at that time was investigations, Earl said. He arrived on the scene on June 26, 1965. He said the hours and days that followed were painstaking as he and other investigators processed the crime scene and meticulously gathered evidence. Their precision and attention to detail are likely the reasons DNA evidence was still intact all this time later. "We were careful," Earl said. "We took hundreds of pictures. We photographed her shoes, her clothing, her underwear." Weber said he has forgiven his sister's killer, and he hopes this can bring closure to others close to the case too. Earl said getting that call on the 59th anniversary of Tanya's death was a personal payoff. After more than 4 decades, police in Illinois have cracked a cold case involving the murder of a 19-year-old woman whose body was found in a river weeks after going missing. Kathy Halle left her home on Volks Court in North Aurora, Illinois, on March 29, 1979, to pick up her sister at the nearby Northgate Shopping Center. Her family would not see her again. Police initially investigated the case as a missing person, but 3 weeks later, on April 24, 1979, North Aurora police discovered her remains in the Fox River. After years of investigations, authorities determined there was not enough evidence to identify a suspect, and the case went cold. In 2019, police in nearby Lisle, Illinois, reopened the 1976 murder case of 16-year-old Pamela Moore and used DNA to link Lindell to the slaying Ryan Pete, a detective with the North Aurora Police Department said. In 2020, North Aurora detectives working on Halle's case met with Lisle investigators, and evidence was re-inspected and sent for additional testing, Pete said. While that DNA showed there was a mixture of 2 individuals, the DNA was too degraded for a working profile, Pete said. In 2022, the North Aurora police learned there was a box of evidence with Lindell's belongings at the police department in nearby Naperville, Illinois, and that evidence showed Lindell frequented the Northgate Shopping Center where Halle worked. Pete then looked into a new DNA tool, the MVAC DNA wet vacuum, which can help collect DNA from older cases. In June 2023, North Aurora police sent the evidence from Halle's case to DNA Labs International in Florida to be analyzed with the new MVAC tool. This August, police received a report from the lab showing that DNA approximately 9.4 trillion times more probable to have originated from Bruce Lindell was present on Kathy's clothing, Pete said. "We are able to conclude Lindell was responsible for the death of Kathy Halle," Pete said, adding that police believe Halle was abducted from her apartment complex parking lot. Authorities did not provide her cause of death, but Kane County State's Attorney Jamie Mosser said that Halle's killing appeared similar to other abductions and killings linked to Lindell. Lindell has been connected to several other cases in this area from that time frame, Pete added. Lindell could be responsible for the murders of up to a dozen young women, according to reports. Lindell died in 1981 at the age of 29. He accidentally stabbed a major artery in his own leg and bled to death while he was attacking an 18-year-old man in Naperville. Had he not killed himself while in a murder, we would have authorized first-degree murder charges against Bruce Lindell, and we would have proceeded to trial for Halle's case, Kane County State's Attorney Jamie Mosser said. Halle's family said in a statement read on their behalf, "While revisiting this case has been incredibly difficult for our family, we're deeply grateful to finally have closure after 45 long years. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology and groundbreaking investigative tools, we're hopeful that other families won't have to endure the same pain and uncertainty that we faced for so many years." Detectives have made an arrest in the 1980 killing of a Sacramento mother after years of struggling with evidence. Water leaking from a 27-year-old Sacramento mother's apartment frustrated residents who called the apartment manager to complain. The manager arrived at the 2-bedroom apartment in the North Laguna neighborhood to investigate, but it wasn't just water that greeted the manager of the Rangewood West Apartments in August 1980. A baby crawled amid knocked-over furniture scattered through a blood-spattered apartment that apparently bore signs of a struggle. An assailant had scrawled an offensive racial slur over the bathroom door and vanity mirror, authorities said. Helen Terry, the mother, was found next to an overflowing bathtub with 13 stab wounds on her chest, back, thigh, and abdomen area, according to reports in 1980. Police at the time theorized that Terry desperately fought her assailant, who dragged her to the bathroom. On Wednesday, October the 2nd, the Sacramento Police Department announced the arrest of 81-year-old Robert Terry on suspicion of Helen Terry's homicide at the apartments on Wyndham Drive. The Rancho Cordova resident was arrested Friday, September 27th, and is being held without bail in the Sacramento County Jail on homicide charges. Investigative leads had dried up in Helen Terry's homicide until 2016, when an investigator reopened the case under an initiative to investigate cold cases. Police said DNA found at the scene pointed to a suspect named Robert Terry, 81, but it still wasn't enough to arrest Terry. Investigators partnered with the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office to re-examine the case. Through advanced investigative methods, investigators found new information that provided necessary evidence to arrest Terry. Helen Terry had believed her son to be Robert's son, something to be disputed. Both were involved in a paternity lawsuit to determine the son's father. Officer Anthony Gamble, a spokesman for the police department, said it is still unclear if Terry fathered the child and what the relationship was between the suspect and victim. Terry appeared Monday, September 30th, for his arraignment in Sacramento Superior Court, but the hearing was postponed. Police said anyone with information regarding the investigation can call 916-808-5471 or Sacramento Valley Crime Stoppers at 916-443-4357. Callers can remain anonymous and may be eligible for a reward up to $1,000. After 7 years, one family in Florida is finally getting justice for their daughter, Christin Cassels, after 3 men were arrested in her murder case. Brenda Cassels is living a nightmare. I go every night to her room and tell her good night and that I love her and I will never stop seeking justice for you, baby. Detective James Parker at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office has been working this case since the very beginning on April 21, 2017. It all started at a home on the outskirts of the small town of Hawthorne. Christin Cassels was killed just days before her 24th birthday. She and her boyfriend had returned from a day at the beach. They were outside the home where they were staying, off US 301, when a group of people approached. When Cassels tried to head back inside, the gunfire began. That is confirmed through multiple witnesses that there were multiple suspects involved, Parker stated. He tried to grab her and pull her in, but it was too late, Brenda Cassels said through tears. They started shooting. They shot my baby like she was some damn dog on the street. Christin Cassels was killed. Her boyfriend was not hurt. Parker doesn't believe she was the target or that her death was ever part of the suspect's plans. He believes they were after something else. There were items that were targeted, money and potentially narcotics, Parker said. The fact that someone died as a result, my belief is that this plan that was devised did not go according to plan. But the fact remains shots were fired and Christin Cassels died. In his investigation, Parker says out of all the people deputies spoke to, no one had anything negative to say about the 23-year-old, which even he admits is rare. Brenda Cassels says her daughter was a certified nursing assistant who wanted to focus on taking care of the elderly. Now she will never see all her daughter could have become. It's not fair that we have to go to the cemetery to see her, Brenda Cassels said. She should be out doing what she loves to do. The investigation has been a challenging one for Parker. Hawthorne is a small town and loyalties run deep, so information about Christin Cassels' death has been sparse. There are people in that community that do know information and have not provided it, he said. It could end the nightmare for Brenda Cassels and her family because they could finally give their daughter justice. But all that changed in July of this year. On Monday, July 15th, 42-year-old Kenneth Altador was arrested in Fort Lauderdale, and Tuesday, July 16th, 28-year-old Blake Jackson was arrested in Hollywood, Florida, and Nickinson Perrin, 36, is also charged and was already in federal prison on an unrelated case. Perrin has been incarcerated since 2020, and his extradition date is set for July 21st. I want them to stay locked up and never get out. At least you still have a little bit of freedom because you can breathe, eat, and hang out in a jail cell where I can't even talk to my daughter, shared Brenda Cassels. All 3 suspects are being held on no bond on first-degree murder charges. I always knew Blake had something to do with it, and his whole family would lie about it, and they were supposed to have been friends with my daughter, said Brenda Cassels. Brenda Cassels said that Christin grew up with Jackson and worked for his mother. She says she couldn't be more grateful for the detectives at the Alachua County Sheriff's Office. An Alachua County grand jury indicted Blake Jackson, 28, Kenneth Altador, 42, and Nickinson Perrin, 36, on charges of first-degree murder and armed burglary. A pharmacist's stabbing death in her Walker County home almost 25 years ago has long remained an unsolved murder case. On June 11, 2000, McDonald's body was discovered with multiple stab wounds at her home on Arnold Lane in Lafayette, North Georgia, Walker County Sheriff Steve Wilson said at an August 30th news conference. She had been dead for about 3 or 4 days before her body was found, according to the sheriff. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's third effort at solving the murder of Julie led them to Birmingham, Alabama, right at the door of Clarence George. George was initially identified as one of 4 or 5 suspects in the case, said Special Agent in Charge Joe Montgomery, in part because George was found with McDonald's checkbook in neighboring Catoosa County. It was not a stranger crime, Wilson said. They knew each other. Montgomery declined to discuss what motive George may have had for killing McDonald. They say the 63-year-old was a match with the evidence, and on August 22nd, officers arrested George and booked him into the Jefferson County Jail in Birmingham. "We never give up on these cold cases," Walker County Sheriff Steve Wilson said at a press conference. George would have been 39 at the time of McDonald's stabbing death. The Walker County Sheriff's Office, who also brought in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, attempted to solve the case at the time, but could not. Then came another effort in 2015 and 2016. While the Georgia Bureau of Investigation says agents and Walker County detectives made tremendous progress, they still weren't able to bring the case to a close. As part of the investigation, they resubmitted evidence for tests, but they say the tests couldn't identify the suspect. However, starting in 2023, a Walker County lieutenant and a Georgia Bureau of Investigation special agent stepped into the investigation and retested the evidence. It would end up helping lead investigators to George, putting him behind bars in McDonald's death. The efforts of the detectives and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents led to the murder and aggravated assault charges on George, the press release says. Wilson said in his press conference that the original investigation showed that George and McDonald had known each other before the crime occurred. "I wouldn't want to categorize them as friends because I don't think friends murder their friends, but they were acquaintances," Wilson said. "They knew each other. It was not a stranger." Now, Sheriff Wilson hopes that the arrest helps bring closure to Julie Ann McDonald's family after 24 years of not knowing who killed their loved one. Many of the victims' relatives have since died, but authorities said they notified McDonald's niece and nephew of the arrest. The biggest gratification working these cold cases is giving the family some relief, knowing someone has been found guilty in a court of law and someone was held accountable for a death that is totally unnecessary, Wilson said. "That's what I think is the biggest victory, when you are able to get a conviction in these cases." George has a lengthy arrest record in Alabama, but not for violent crimes, court records show. George was taken to the Jefferson County Jail in Birmingham, where he is awaiting extradition back to Georgia to face his charges. Kent police detectives used DNA genealogy comparisons and a discarded cigarette to find the man who killed Dorothy Silzel 44 years ago in Washington State at her Kent condo shortly after she ended her shift at a local pizza parlor shop where she worked on the weekends to supplement her income as a full-time training supervisor for Boeing. Dorothy Marie Silzel was last seen the night of February 23, 1980, between 10 and 10:15 p.m. when she left Gaetano's Pizza at the end of her shift. Silzel graduated from high school in Mandan, North Dakota. She lived in the Seattle area for about 12 years prior to her death. Silzel, whose family and friends called Dottie, was single and lived alone and worked 2 jobs. By day, she was an instructor at Boeing Aircraft Company. Some nights, she also worked at Gaetano's Pizza to earn extra income. On February 26, 1980, a Kent patrol officer was dispatched to Silzel's condo to meet her friends and coworkers from Boeing for a welfare check. She had not reported for work for 2 days, which was highly unusual. The officer entered the home through an open slider door and found Silzel's body on the 2nd floor of the condo. She had signs of lividity, indicating she had been dead for some time. Local police found that she had been sexually assaulted, suffered a blow to her head, and deemed her death to be a homicide via strangulation. "Aunt Dottie was my dad's youngest sister and the baby girl of a family of 9. said her niece, Leanne Milligan. "I remember when we were little kids, she would hand sew a whole box of Barbie doll clothes and give them to all of her nieces. She was that kind of person." Milligan was 20 years old when Dottie was killed. She idolized her and remembers how much she loved her career. "She was only 10 years older than I am. She worked at Boeing. I got a job at Boeing, and we were more alike at that time of our lives." Although DNA technology was not advanced enough to identify a suspect at the time, DNA evidence was collected during the initial investigation, including a bathrobe. Evidence was sent to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, and utilizing microscopic examination, the lab located DNA evidence belonging to an unknown male, named Individual A, according to police. Over the years, multiple Kent detectives were assigned to the case and worked numerous tips and leads. Multiple DNA samples were obtained for comparison, but none had been identified as the Individual A. In 2015, members of Silzel's family contacted Ford, a major crimes sergeant, to take a look at the case again. Ford assigned the case to himself and has worked it for the last 9 years. "I knew about the case," Ford said at the press conference. "I knew her name. I didn't know all the facts. Once I got into it, I couldn't put it down." In March 2022, Kent police began pursuing possible DNA matches and came back with 11 suspects, according to reports. Washington Attorney General Bob Ferguson said on social media that his office's sexual assault kit initiative funded forensic genetic genealogy testing that narrowed the list of suspects. 2 of the potential suspects identified through DNA were Kurt and Kenneth Kundert, brothers living in Arkansas. In September 2023, Kent detectives found out the 2 brothers were in custody for an assault. Ford worked with the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office to request voluntary DNA from the brothers. Kurt Kundert gave a voluntary sample, according to police. Kenneth Kundert declined. The State Patrol Crime Lab excluded Kurt Kundert as a suspect because he was not a match. The other suspect, Kenneth Kundert, who at the time was living in Van Buren County, Arkansas. He had lived and worked in Seattle in 1987, but no earlier records were available. Police also found that he had a family member who had lived near Silzel at the time of her murder, and he had misdemeanor convictions in King County throughout the 80s and 90s, according to reports. Kundert was already under investigation for assault in Arkansas, and during an interview with him about the crime, Van Buren County detectives tried to get a sample from him, but according to charging documents and police, he put extinguished cigarettes in a water bottle that he drank from in his pocket and declined to give a voluntary sample. Kent police began conducting surveillance on Kundert while he lived in Arkansas. Eventually, he dropped a cigarette before entering a store. The cigarette was recovered and tested for DNA. The DNA on the cigarette matched the DNA that was found in Silzel's condo, police said. Members of the Van Buren County Sheriff's Office and detectives with the Kent Police Department arrested Kundert on August 20th. Kundert has been charged with first-degree murder. He is being held on a $3 million bail. Jodi Arias made headlines when she was charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend Travis Alexander in June 2008. After the gruesome, salacious details surrounding the murder were revealed, Arias testified during the 2013 trial that she had killed Alexander in self-defense. She was found guilty of first-degree murder and later sentenced to life in prison after 2 juries deadlocked on whether to impose the death penalty. Convicted killer Jodi Arias was born on July 9, 1980, in Salinas, California. In the summer of 2008, Arias made national headlines when she was charged with murdering her ex-boyfriend, Travis Alexander, a 30-year-old member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who was working as a motivational speaker and insurance salesman. Arias and Alexander had met at a conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, in 2006, while he was living in Arizona and she was a resident of Palm Desert, California. By the following year, they were a committed couple. After only 5 months as a couple, however, the two went their separate ways in late June 2007, but still maintained a sexual relationship. On June 9, 2008, Alexander's body was found in a pool of blood in the shower of his Mesa, Arizona home by friends who had become increasingly worried about his whereabouts. Almost immediately after entering the residence, the young men began taking in the heinous crime scene. In the bathroom, they found Alexander with a gunshot wound to the head. more than 24 stab wounds and a deeply and widely slit throat. Investigators later determined that the murder had occurred 5 days before his body was found on June 4, 2008. Arias quickly became the focus of investigations. She was indicted on first-degree murder charges on July 9, 2008, and arrested in California soon after. Arias initially denied any involvement in the killing, despite the discovery of her DNA mixed with Alexander's blood at the crime scene, but she later changed her story, claiming that she and her ex had been attacked by 2 masked intruders. After killing Alexander, the criminals decided to let her live, she told the police, adding that she chose not to alert authorities at the time because she feared the intruders might seek revenge. Testimony in Arias' trial began in early January 2013, which was aired live to the public and became a media sensation. The following month, the alleged killer took the witness stand in her defense, from where she would testify for 18 consecutive days. Already infamously known for her different accounts of Alexander's murder, Arias stated that she had killed her ex in an impassioned act of self-defense. She testified that Alexander had frequently abused her and that she killed him after he came at her in a fit of rage when she dropped his camera. She also claimed to have suffered memory loss as the result of emotional trauma experienced during the incident, with a psychological expert corroborating that she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. "Lying isn't typically something I just do," Arias stated during the trial in response to a query from the jury. "The lies I've told in this case can be tied directly back to either protecting Travis's reputation or my involvement in his death, because I was very ashamed." On May 8, 2013, Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. 5 jurors found her guilty of premeditated murder, and 7 found her guilty of both premeditated and felony murder, a verdict that sparked elation among Alexander's family members. However, the judge declared a mistrial in the penalty phase after the jury deadlocked on whether Arias deserved the death penalty. The penalty retrial began in October 2014, with a new jury revisiting the same evidence presented the first time around. This time, the focus was on the psychological makeup of both parties, with the defense attempting to portray their client as a vulnerable woman and Alexander as emotionally and physically abusive. In March 2015, the second jury was unable to agree on Arias' sentence as well, removing the option of the death penalty and leaving punishment terms to Judge Sherry Stevens. On April 13th, after expressing remorse for her actions in a statement, Arias received a life sentence without the possibility of parole after 25 years, and she began serving her term at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Perryville. Although Arias appealed her conviction and sentencing, the process was bogged down by transcript errors and omissions. The court record was finally declared complete in April 2017, nearly 2 years after the appeals process began, and that summer a 2018 deadline was established for the defense and prosecution to file their legal briefs. Additional complications surfaced in October 2017, when Arias alleged in a civil suit that the head of her legal team broke attorney-client privilege by disclosing confidential information for the expressed purpose of financial gain and his own public redemption in a tell-all book about the case. Alvin Neelley was madly in love with Judith Ann Adams, later to become Judith Ann Neelley, the troubled daughter of a large family from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. No stranger to trouble himself, Alvin had been committing petty crimes and stealing cars throughout his young adult life. Not much else is known about Alvin Neelley's early life before his notorious crime spree, other than he was born in Georgia, where he would later die while behind bars. Soon after meeting Judith, Alvin left his wife and 3 children. He eloped with her in the summer of 1980, and she became Judith Ann Neelley, a teen bride to a much older man. While she still hadn't fully recovered from the death of her father, an alcoholic who perished in a fatal motorcycle accident, it was ultimately meeting and marrying Alvin Neelley that would be Judith Ann Neelley's undoing. The two began a life of crime together, committing armed robberies as they traveled across the South. They slept in their car, in the occasional motel room, mostly living on the run and stealing to support themselves, forging checks along the way. At 16, Judith Ann Neelley became pregnant with twins. This didn't slow down the crime-committing couple, though. who continued their robberies well into Judith's pregnancy. A botched robbery at a Georgia mall briefly put the pair behind bars. While incarcerated, Judith gave birth to twins. Upon their release, Alvin Neelley and Judith Ann Neelley reunited, and their criminal actions took a turn for the depraved. On September 25, 1982, Judith spotted 13-year-old Lisa Milliken at Riverbend Mall in Rome, Georgia. She convinced the young girl to join her and Alvin at a motel in nearby Scottsboro, Alabama. Upon arrival, Judith and Alvin seized upon Lisa. Over the course of the following days, they raped and tortured their victim before eventually murdering her. On October 4, 1982, Judith targeted a young engaged couple named Janice Chapman and John Hancock. She claimed to be taking them to a party. In reality, Judith led the couple into the woods where Alvin was waiting. After shooting John Hancock and leaving him for dead, Judith and Alvin kidnapped Janice and brought her back to their Alabama motel room. They again tortured and then murdered their captive. Despite being shot, however, John Hancock had survived his attack. He was able to report the crime to authorities. On October 9, 1982, Judith Neelley was arrested. Alvin was apprehended a few days later. Though both were sent to prison, Judith Neelley was presented as the mastermind behind the killings. Alvin avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to murder and aggravated assault. Judith was not so lucky. She was convicted of the murder of Lisa Milliken and sentenced to death in 1983. The conviction made Judith the youngest woman to be sentenced to death in the United States. After a lengthy appeals process, Judith Neelley's sentence was commuted to life in prison. She continues to spend her life in jail. Alvin lived out the rest of his days behind bars, dying in November of 2005. True crime author Thomas Cook cracks open this twisted case in Early Graves. Drawing on police records from District Attorney Richard E. Gu and investigator Danny Smith, he presents a gut-wrenching account of Alvin and Judith's relationship and their descent into darkness. They were on the road again, this time headed south toward Macon, Georgia. It had been a wild few days. Several months before, someone had called them Bonnie and Clyde, but they'd agreed that they were more like a comedy version of that infamous couple. Later, they'd even come up with a new name for themselves, Bonnie and Claude. But now, after all they'd done in Rome, they were coming close to the real thing. Shootings, fire bombings. That was one way to show people you weren't joking anymore. But there were other ways too, and on the way to Macon, they hatched a few new plans. In prison, he'd been told that if you gave people certain kinds of shots, the cops wouldn't be able to tell they'd been murdered. So they stopped at a drugstore and picked up a few diabetic needles and a bottle of liquid Drano and liquid Plumber. Once on the road again, he kept his eyes on her brown Dodge as it cruised along in front of him. He liked his own car best, a red Ford Granada that he kept nice and neat. That was one of the differences between them. She was sloppy and unkempt, and her car always looked that way. That was one of the reasons he didn't want to drive with her anymore. The other was the way she acted, nice at times, then cold and mean. It was as if she would say things just to tick him off. Then the air would suddenly get sharp, and the whole world would start to ache. Traveling separately and yet together was one way to keep the pain at bay. It was better to have two cars and just talk to each other over the Cobra CB radios they had installed in each of them. Once in Macon, they stayed in another crummy little motel, the kind that smelled dank, as if there were pools of stagnant water under the floor. There were times when they hated it, but when that happened, they just moved on. That seemed to help a little, as if the movement, the endless heading down endless roads, was the only thing that relieved the tension that grew around them when they stopped. The road cut them some slack, but only for a while, only until they stopped again at the next motel. Another one that looked the same, felt the same, had the same crummy furniture and dank wet smell. During their first couple of days in Macon, they came up with lots of great ideas, but finally agreed on just one to start with. He sat on the bed next to her when she dialed the phone. When Mrs. Allen answered, she told her that her husband was beating her up and that she needed help. Then she asked Mrs. Allen if she would meet her at her motel. Mrs. Allen said she would drop by the next day at around 5:30. The couple laughed together about how easy it was going to be. But Mrs. Allen was just the beginning, so the next day they rode around Macon looking for John Brownlee's house, one of the security people from the Macon Youth Development Center. There was a plan to deal with him too, but that would come later, after they'd finished with Mrs. Allen. Then suddenly there was a hitch. At around 5 in the afternoon, someone from the Youth Development Center called to say that Mrs. Allen had to go out of town and would not be able to come to the motel. They suspected Mrs. Allen had lied, and so the next day they drove out to the Youth Development Center office and spotted Allen's car. She'd not been called out of town at all. They shook their heads at what liars other people were. Since Mrs. Allen had slipped by, they decided to go after Brownlee instead. They drove until they found Brownlee's house. Then they drove back to the motel, and she called Brownlee up. She'd always known he had an eye for her, and so she spoke to him flirtatiously, using her hot little country girl act. She wanted to meet him, she said. Then she reminded him he'd once told her that if she were ever in town, he wanted to see her. But Brownlee couldn't meet her because he'd gotten married only a few months before. Maybe some other time, he told her, if he could bring along his wife. After she hung up, they discussed a plan to drop her off at Brownlee's house when no one was at home. She could go through the window and let her husband in. Together, they could wait for the Brownlees to get home. Then he could knock Brownlee out, wait until he came to, and rape his wife in front of him. He could do that to all the wives of the men at the Youth Development Center. Every one of them who had done bad things to his wife. Now he could do bad things to their wives, rape and kill them. That would show them it was really payback time. Perhaps they had slept through it all, he thought, but one child had been awake throughout, and he found himself focusing on her, a 13-year-old girl handcuffed in the car, silently watching as Neelley paced the area, large and looming in the distance, perhaps stopping here and there to lean cautiously over the canyon wall, glance down, then back up at Lisa, making dreadful calculations. Igu knew what she was looking for, a place out of the way, with a sharp edge, a precipitous drop. But he wondered if Lisa had known that too, as she sat in the car, listening to the little hissing breezes that seemed never entirely to abandon the canyon edge. Perhaps instead, Lisa had tried to tell herself that Neelley was looking for something else, a place where she could safely let her go, or let the children play, or much more simply, perhaps only a mountain flower to bring back to them, something soft and pretty to greet them when they woke. But if Lisa had harbored such comforting hopes, they were quickly to be dashed. "What happened after you went back to the car?" Smith asked. "I told her to get out," Neelley said, "and I took her over to the tree, and I told her to lay down right there, and I told her I was going to give her a shot to put her to sleep so I could leave, and she wouldn't know where I was going." Lisa did as she was told, Neelley continued, and while she lay on the ground, handcuffed to a tree, Neelley bent over her and gave her a shot in the left side of her neck, pressing down on the small black plunger, releasing a caustic drain cleaner. Liquid Drano into Lisa Milliken's throat. Igu closed his eyes slowly as he listened. He could almost hear her tiny moan. "The liquid Drano hadn't worked," Neelley went on, "so I got the liquid plumber." There followed another shot on the other side of the neck, but it didn't work either. Lisa continued to lie face down on the ground, Neelley said. She was moaning softly and complaining that the shots were hurting her. Neelley administered another shot, this one in Lisa's left arm, then, after a short interval, another into her right arm. Neither of them worked, and so the next one went into Lisa's right buttock, and still another into her left buttock. And still, it didn't work. "She said it was hurting," Neelley said matter-of-factly. "But Lisa was still alive," she added. "The shots were not killing her." Igu glanced toward the window. It was mid-October, but the cold outside the room seemed like nothing compared to the cold within it. "Why did you think about liquid plumber and Drano?" Smith asked. He answered, "'Cause it had lye in it." Igu felt his breath stop. Half an hour. Terror lengthens, seconds into days. He could not imagine the eternity of half an hour. "Did the shots have any effect?" Smith asked. "She said they burned," Neelley answered dully. "She said she was cold. She wanted me to give her a shirt and let her lay down." He asked, "Did you?" He answered, "Yes." Lisa was burning, and she was cold, but she wouldn't die. Because of that, it was time to take the next step. After Alvin Neelley and Judith Ann Neelley were apprehended for the murders of Lisa Milliken and Janice Chapman, they were each sentenced to life in prison, Alvin in Georgia and Judith in Alabama. never to see each other again. Initially, they were both supposed to receive the death penalty until Alvin pleaded guilty, saving himself from that fate. Judith's death penalty was to be carried out since it was deduced that she was the mastermind behind the couple's gruesome crimes. However, 3 days before her death date, the governor of Alabama instead gave her a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The governor's decision caused controversy and outrage. Many believe that Judith Ann Neelley deserved the death penalty or at least life imprisonment without parole for her heinous actions. Despite this, Judith has never been approved for parole, being denied in 2018 and as recently as 2023. She will be eligible for parole consideration again in May 2028. Before November 1, 2004, Napa, California was known for its temperate weather, gorgeous scenery, plethora of local vineyards, and quality of life for its residents, which included being a very safe community. Despite the many tourists who flocked from other parts of California, as well as throughout the United States and Europe, crime was not a common occurrence. In fact, Napa had not seen a homicide in over 2 years as Halloween of 2004 rolled around. On that last day of October, roommates Adrienne Insogna, Leslie Mazzara, and Lauren Mianza spent the evening handing out candy to trick-or-treaters that rang the bell at their Dorset Street home. By 11 p.m., the lights were out and all three had turned in, Adrienne and Leslie to their upstairs bedrooms and Lauren to her downstairs bedroom. All would be quiet until around 2 a.m. At that time, Lauren was awakened by the sound of breaking glass and what she would describe as a blood-curdling, terrified scream. She cautiously crept from her bed to head upstairs to investigate. She was stopped when she heard the sound of heavy footsteps coming down the stairs toward her. Terrified, she ran out the back door and into the yard where she hid, perfectly still. She would hear the sounds of someone climbing out of the basement window and running off into the night before she would regain her courage and re-enter the house. She climbed the stairs and, hearing crying coming from Adrienne's room, headed that way. She never could have been prepared for what sight met her. Leslie was face down in a pool of blood. Adrienne was crouched down behind the bed, still alive, but bleeding heavily. There was so much blood in the room that Lauren slipped. She tried to call 911 on the house phone, but the line was dead. She retrieved her mobile phone and called for help while running out to her own car and driving away. She was petrified that the person who attacked her roommates was still in the house or the area. Paramedics arrived on Dorset Street quickly. Leslie was dead. Adrienne would die very soon after the paramedics' arrival. Both of them had been stabbed many, many times. Lauren had not seen anyone, although she had heard the attacks. The local authorities began their investigation. They combed the crime scene and found cigarette butts outside the home. As neither Lauren, Leslie, nor Adrienne smoked, they believed the attacker had lain in wait, biding his time and smoking, before entering the home on his murderous errand. They would also find blood at the scene that was not Leslie's or Adrienne's. It appeared their killer had cut himself. DNA tests, though, would take time. Napa reeled from the savage murders. Because a suspect wasn't caught immediately, residents were terrified and rumors began to swirl. One of the more repeated ones was that Lauren, Leslie, and Adrienne were mixed up with drugs, and the murders were a hit. Another one was that Francis Ford Coppola, who owned the winery Leslie worked at and was therefore Leslie's boss, had mob ties and the ladies were collateral damage. Neither rumor had any basis in truth and fact. The local police believed that Leslie was the intended victim. She had been attacked first and very viciously. The evidence indicated that she had been sleeping when she was first stabbed and had attempted to run away from her killer, headed toward Adrienne's room. Adrienne, it seems, had heard the attack on Leslie and run to her friend's defense, sustaining fatal stab wounds herself in the process. Police began to check into the backgrounds of Adrienne and Leslie, looking for a killer. Adrienne Insogna had cheated death at 16, surviving a near-fatal car crash. The car had rolled 3 times, Adrienne striking her head on the pavement through the open window. Always scrappy, she had survived, a miracle, and returned to school within a few months, although she did suffer with some memory loss as a result of the temporary brain damage caused by the accident. She would heal and excel in school, earning a scholarship to California Polytechnic State University. She pursued her dream of becoming an engineer successfully. Hired on by the city of Napa after she graduated, Adrian was working there at the time of her murder. Just 4 months before her death, she celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the car accident, the time when she was granted a miracle and cheated death, with one of her closest friends, Lily Prudhomme. Shortly after being hired by the city, she started dating Christian Lee. Their relationship would be rocky, on again and off again. She wanted a serious commitment. He wasn't ready. Adrienne had seen Christian on Halloween night when she dropped by after handing out candy to the kids. She left his place around 10 p.m., and that was the last time he saw her. They had been arguing about her desire for a commitment and about the fact that she had gone to a party recently and met a guy, something that made Christian jealous. Other than the quasi-drama with Christian, Adrienne led a quiet life. She had a circle of friends, including Lily, that she had known for years. She did not have a high-risk lifestyle. Leslie Mazzara, unlike Adrienne, had a huge circle of friends and was extremely outgoing. She was the new girl on the block, having moved to California from Anderson, South Carolina only months earlier. A former beauty queen, Leslie had given consideration to becoming a teacher or an attorney, but seemed stuck. Her mother, Kathy, had gone to Berkeley and had invited her daughter out for the summer to work in one of the wineries and gather her thoughts. From the moment that Leslie arrived in Napa, she seemed to love it. She went to director Francis Ford Coppola's winery and was hired on the spot. The stunning and outgoing young lady was the perfect fit for the winery. What began as a summer job turned into a passion. She decided that she wanted to make the wine business her career. Even when her mother relocated to Michigan, Leslie stayed behind in Napa. For Leslie's family, there seemed little cause for concern. She was well-liked, a smart girl, and Napa was a safe, homey community. Leslie was popular, especially so with men. She didn't appear to be a player or user. In fact, she remained on good terms with everyone she dated. 2 of her South Carolina friends who had visited Leslie only weeks before the murders said that she was dating 2 men at the time. One man was older, and the other, they said, Leslie was quite serious about. The 2 friends had been there when the older man came by and spotted flowers the younger man had sent. They claimed he was furious. Multiple friends of Leslie's said she was a heartbreaker, but an unintentional one. She was a sweet girl who made everyone feel as though he or she was Leslie's best friend. Leslie's computer was searched and an email from an ex was discovered. The 2 had broken up years earlier after he proposed and she turned him down. But he reached out to her not long before her murder. The family of another man had sent her on a cruise and she received a car as a gift from another man. A month before her death, Leslie had returned to South Carolina for a friend's wedding, toting a new set of luggage she received from another admirer. This same friend would report that the night Leslie was murdered, the father of a man Leslie had broken up with had tried repeatedly to reach her by telephone. Between Adrienne and Leslie seemed more likely in the eyes of the police to be the intended target. They felt that she may have crossed paths with someone who grew obsessed with her. The murders were clearly not random. The killer had waited outside and then, upon gaining entry to the house, headed straight upstairs. Police interviewed more than 1,500 people, obtaining DNA samples with no matches or further leads. They interrogated Christian Lee the day that Adrienne was murdered, even getting a DNA sample. They interviewed and obtained samples from the men Leslie had dated. No luck. The lack of any suspects or arrests frustrated the victims' families and friends, who felt they had to defend their reputations and fight to keep the investigation going. Time passed and went on for others. Lily Prudhomme, Adrienne's best friend, decided after Adrienne's murder that life was too short, and after putting it off the year before, married her boyfriend, Eric Koppel. Adrienne's mother, Arlene, attended the wedding, where the song She Will Be Loved, Adrienne's favorite song, was played in her honor. It was a joyous occasion and yet still sad, as someone was clearly missing from the Prudhomme-Koppel wedding party. In South Carolina, a fundraiser called the Raising Race was organized in Leslie's memory to raise funds for Calvary Home for Children, a charity Leslie worked closely with when she was a beauty queen and living in the area. The Raising Race is a South Carolina version of the Amazing Race and helmed by survivor contestants Rob and Amber, who met Leslie's friend Kelly while competing on the Amazing Race. In September of 2005, almost a year after the murders, the local police decided to publicly release the evidence about the cigarette butts and the fact they were Turkish gold, a variation of camels that had only been on the market for a very short period of time and were unusual. Tests revealed that the DNA on the cigarettes matched the blood DNA in the upstairs bedroom. The police felt that revealing the brand of cigarettes would result in someone knowing who the killer was. They had no idea the killer would contact them himself. It was a Tuesday night. All the detectives working the case had left for the day. Eric Koppel showed up at the station with his wife, Lily, and other family members. Like other Napa residents, he had heard about the Turkish gold cigarettes being found at the crime scene and, believing he was about to be caught, confessed to having killed Adrienne and Leslie. Eric Koppel's arrest was a mixture of relief and devastation. Adrienne's mother, Arlene, was shocked and horrified that the husband of Adrienne's best friend, the wedding she herself had attended in place of Adrienne, had murdered her daughter. For Leslie's family, there was a sense of relief that Leslie was not the sole target, but equal confusion, as Eric didn't know Leslie. The police came under scrutiny with Koppel's arrest. They had never interviewed him nor taken a DNA sample, despite being in Adrienne's inner circle and having been to the Dorset Street home. They had apparently called him at the beginning of the investigation and left messages, which Koppel did not return, but never followed up. The police chief, after the arrest, said they would have eventually spoken to Eric and obtained a DNA sample. Eric provided one after his arrest, and to no surprise, his DNA matched that on the cigarettes and in the blood found in the house. In January of 2007, Eric Koppel was sentenced to life in prison after a plea deal was agreed upon by Koppel, the DA, and the victims' families, which took the death penalty off the table. The mothers of both Leslie and Adrienne addressed Koppel in the court. Arlene, Adrienne's mother, recounted that her daughter never wore turtlenecks in life, but was buried in one to attempt to cover the wounds Koppel left on her body. She counted out the number of stab wounds he had delivered to Adrienne's body. Leslie's mother, Kathy, read a 13-page letter. Koppel did not look at either Arlene or Kathy as they made their statements. Koppel's wife and Adrienne's best friend, Lily, spoke. She admitted to grieving with Adrienne's mother, but said that she knew a gentler Eric than the Eric that murdered her friend. She publicly proclaimed support for her husband, going so far as to tell him that there was nothing in this world that you could do that would make me love you less. Before he was sentenced, Koppel himself spoke. He apologized to the Insognia and Mazzara families, even crying. He blamed the murders on the death of his grandfather, which sent him into a depression, along with the alcohol he was using in an attempt to cope with the depression. He said that he was going to kill himself, but decided instead to turn himself in so there would be closure to the case. Lily herself said that Eric killed because of his depression. Despite her claim that he could do nothing to change her love for him, she did later divorce him, but inexplicably kept his name. Why did Eric Koppel kill? Was it depression? Alcohol? The Napa police never publicly stated a motive for the murders. It was not a coincidence that November 1st, 2004 was the date that he and Lily Prudhomme had initially planned to marry. She had backed out. Lily later said that she and Adrienne would discuss their relationships with each other, as girlfriends do. It's possible that Lily may have decided to call off the wedding after one of these discussions. Maybe she told Eric, maybe not. But Eric's decision to murder her best friend was one of extreme passive aggressiveness toward Lily. He couldn't kill her, didn't want to kill her, so he could do the next best thing to punish Lily. Maybe he was even attracted to Adrienne. He had been to the house before. He likely knew that Adrienne slept upstairs, but probably didn't know Lauren slept downstairs, which spared her life. He had never met Leslie, and it's probable he didn't know that there were 3 women living in the home. In all likelihood, he only expected 2 women, Adrienne and Lauren. Adrienne, always the scrappy one, had attacked him after he stabbed Leslie. She had drawn blood, leaving behind more DNA evidence. Good for her. It's unusual that Eric Koppel had no record when he murdered Adrienne and Leslie. He was on no one's radar. Lily herself stated that someone surely had noticed something. The killer must have been acting strangely. How could it not be noticed? She also had said she hoped that Adrienne had injured her killer. All the while, Eric Koppel was sitting beside her. Lauren Mayanza, the roommate who survived that brutal night, left Napa and relocated to LA. She said she felt safer in a larger city where violence was the norm. Eric Koppel remains behind bars where he is serving 2 life sentences with no possibility of parole. In 2015, Maria Sosa allegedly spoke with a man she thought was a hitman and offered him money and gifts if he would kill her husband, Houston area boxing coach Ramon Sosa. Maria Sosa was born Maria Lourdes Durante in Mexico on February 11, 1974. She was a dancer known as Lulu at a salsa club known as Mi Luna, which is where she met retired boxer Ramon Sosa in 2007. The couple got married 2 years later, the second marriage for Ramon, as he was divorced with 3 adult children. Maria became a U.S. citizen later on in the marriage, with Ramon helping not only Maria, but her mother and her own teenage children become legalized citizens. A year later, the couple opened Woodland Boxing and Fitness, a gym in Houston. Once Maria received her citizenship, she underwent a noticeable change in personality. Mia Sosa, Ramon's daughter, stated in an interview that Maria wanted nothing to do with her stepchildren and resorted to starting fights and causing disarray amongst the family. Ramon himself revealed that while they were on vacation in Puerto Rico, Maria started an argument that led to her calling hotel security with accusations that Ramon was abusing her, only for her statements to be proven false. By March of 2015, Maria took money from their gym and used it to get a divorce lawyer, while continuing to make random accusations of embezzlement, abuse, and even rape against Ramon, all of which were rebuffed. Maria turned heel months later by planning to have Ramon killed, even going as far voicing her murderous desire to a friend protege of Ramon's in Gustavo, who was often called Mundo. When asked by Maria if he knew someone who could kill Ramon, he recommended someone to her, but afterwards Mundo went straight to Ramon and informed his mentor about Maria's heel turn and her plot against him. The pair worked together to have the villainess arrested, which included going to the police, who sent an officer to go undercover and pose as a hitman and meet Maria. The meeting saw Maria vent and lash out against Ramon and repeatedly voice her desire to want her ex-husband dead. As part of the scheme, Ramon's death was staged as he was placed in a shallow grave and portrayed himself as having been fatally shot near the temple, with Maria being shown the photo of the deceased Ramon. The villainess actually smiled and laughed over the image before paying the hitman, but on the following day, Maria ended up arrested as she returned to the gym. In October of 2016, Maria pleaded guilty to the murder-for-hire scheme and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She had been denied parole at every turn, and with the year she had already served following her arrest, she is set to be released sometime in July of 2035, which would see Maria reach the age of 61. Throughout the entire trial, Maria refused to look at Ramon and showed no remorse for her actions. Plain and simple, Maria was greedy, callous, and cold-hearted. This, in my view, is a classic case of a person who had nothing. Then after seeing that they've hit the jackpot, they want it all, and will even resort to murder to get it. Maria definitely believed that she won the lottery when she married Ramon. She went from being a dancer to being a prominent businesswoman, but it wasn't enough for Maria. After getting what she had longed for, she showed her true colors and started biting the hand that fed her in a quest to get everything. And when she didn't get what she wanted, she saw Ramon as an obstacle and planned to eliminate him. In all, Maria Sosa was truly a cold-blooded villainess, and this true crime tale continues to fascinate me every time I think about it. On October 16, 2016, Maria Sosa was sentenced to up to 20 years in prison. At the time of writing, Sosa is serving her time at the Christina Melton Crane Unit. After a whirlwind romance, Christe Chen thought she'd found the man of her dreams. Now that man, Bradley Dawson, is sitting in a Fiji jail cell, accused of brutally murdering her. When Christe Chen married Bradley Dawson 3 months after they met, friends of the recent pharmacy school graduate were concerned, but also hopeful she'd finally found the love of her life. It was a shock, says Chen's friend Morris Apri, of her decision to marry the recently divorced Dawson, 38, a Memphis-based IT specialist. It happened so quickly. Now her friends are struggling to make sense of the nightmare that unfolded just 2 days into the couple's honeymoon in July at one of the planet's most beautiful locations, Fiji's ultra-private Turtle Island. where villas start at $3,500 a night. Bradley Dawson, 38, is charged with murdering his new wife, Christe Chen, 36, on the night of July 8th. He was arrested after allegedly fleeing that night to the nearby island of Madeline and is being held without bail until trial. Bradley Dawson claimed through his lawyer that Chen's death was an accident. Her family's lawyer, Ronald Gordon, said that Chen died of multiple blunt force trauma wounds to her head and face. It doesn't look like it was an accidental pushing, and she fell and hit her head, and something happened, Gordon stated. A woman who was also staying at the Turtle Island Resort, which can accommodate up to 14 couples at any given time, told Fiji authorities she saw the couple on the night of the alleged fight, but said they appeared to be in good spirits. Other witnesses allegedly heard the newlyweds arguing at a dinner the night Chen was killed. Dawson admitted that he and Chen did have a drunken argument that evening. Sometime that evening, the woman who said they seemed fine at dinner reportedly heard loud banging sounds from the couple's suite, according to a police report. It was as if someone was drunk and unable to control themselves inside, the woman told police. And then we heard a loud scream followed by a big, loud bang, and after that, there was complete silence. Resort staff confirmed to the news outlet that someone had lodged a noise complaint that night. According to Dawson, he chose to board a kayak after the fight and leave the resort for a neighboring island in an alleged attempt to de-escalate the situation. I just wanted to give her some space, Dawson told reporters, implying Chen was still alive when he left. It was normal for me to take a walk. Dawson would have had to have kayaked more than 3 miles in the Pacific Ocean to reach Madeline from the resort. Chen's family lawyer, Ronald Gordon, told Fox News Dawson left his GPS-enabled watch, but took his passport and wallet with him when he left to kayak and ultimately ended up on Madeline. A housekeeper found Chen's body the following day when the newlyweds failed to show up for breakfast. Dawson was arrested 2 days later on the west coast of Fiji's mainland, Viti Levu, in the town of Nadi. His location was reportedly given away by indigenous residents on a nearby remote island after Dawson allegedly tried to flee. Fiji authorities said Dawson initially confessed to the murder before lawyering up. Dawson was an IT specialist for a nonprofit organization that works with children until his recent suspension in light of the allegations. He appeared for a preliminary bail hearing at the Lautaka High Court on Wednesday, where Judge Riaz Hamza rejected requests for Dawson's pretrial release. Dawson's defense lawyer, Iqbal Khan, argued the case could take 2 years, asking, why should he remain inside for that long? Judge Hamza also denied a request by Gordon to have the Chen family as a formal party in the case, which could allow relatives less restricted access to the evidence presented in the trial. They can still attend hearings. Chen graduated from the University of Tennessee and worked as a pharmacist in a Memphis area Kroger. She was a noted community pharmacy resident at the university's Health Science Center, having received awards in pharmaceutical science. Neighbors stated they hadn't heard the couple argue in the past. The relationship had been a whirlwind romance, with some of Chen's friends claiming they hadn't met Dawson until the couple married in February. The couple embarked on their honeymoon 5 months later. The Turtle Island Resort is a 5-star luxury destination with sweeping views, offering rooms at several $1,000s per night, according to their website. The resort had also served as a vacation destination for Dawson and a previous wife just 2 years ago. It's unclear why the couple divorced, but Good Morning America reported the divorce wasn't finalized until the month before Dawson married Chen. His college ex-girlfriend told the program that, when they dated in 2005, the romance was definitely intense and fast, but that, after they became serious, Dawson was very verbally manipulative and threatening and jealous, and that he'd pushed her down and chased her. Gordon said Chen's family might seek a wrongful death lawsuit against Dawson in the future. If convicted, he faces life in prison. A former Chase employee and her husband stole $50,000 from a dementia-ridden man, then killed his daughter and grandson after they started asking questions, police say. Cynthia Stack, 52, and 22-year-old Sean Stack were found shot to death in their Center Hill, Florida apartment on July 18th. Joshua Ramsawmy, 28, was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm while his wife, Amelia Bissoon, 25, was charged with 2 counts of principal to first-degree murder. It all started when a 25-year-old banker at Chase Bank met a 75-year-old customer named Jerry Stack. Officers say Amelia Bissoon and her husband Joshua Ramsawmy murdered Jerry's daughter Cynthia Stack and her son Sean on July 18, 2018. Ramsawmy and Bissoon were said to have killed the mother and son in efforts to cover up that they were stealing money from Cynthia's father, who suffered a traumatic brain injury and is said to possibly have dementia. Cynthia's father even went as far to follow Bissoon when she moved to a different location. Bissoon is said to have made 2 $25,000 checks out to her young son, taking the money from the man's account. Ramsawmy was said to have then opened 2 Bank of America accounts and deposited the money in them. According to police, Cynthia began inquiring about the money, which would eventually lead to Ramsawmy buying a gun and shooting them both. The couple wouldn't come forth with the truth initially, but Bissoon eventually admitted to her husband killing the two. Neither of the suspects had had previous records. A neighbor found Cynthia dead on a futon on July 19th when she was walking her dog and noticed their door was still open. Sean was discovered by Orlando police in a different part of the apartment when they arrived on the scene at approximately 7 a.m. The family's puppy, less than a year old, was found also at the scene and taken by the Orlando Police Department. It's a sad and sick situation for people to take advantage of someone like that, said Emily Rivera, Cynthia's daughter and Sean's younger sister. They did nothing to deserve this. They were an innocent family minding their own business, trying to live their life like everyone else. Sean was just always so grateful for what he had, even though he didn't have that much, she added. My mother was, always trying to spread her love to other people, always trying to help other people. She was just the sweetest woman. "30-year-old Sabrina Kauldhar has been arrested for committing 3 murders in 3 consecutive days across Ontario, Canada. The first victim, Trinh Thi Vu, a woman in her 60s who was Kauldhar's roommate, was found murdered in their Toronto home on October 1st. The following day, 47-year-old Lance Cunningham was discovered dead in Niagara Falls, and on October 3rd, 77-year-old Mario Bilic, a retired schoolteacher, was fatally stabbed in a Hamilton parking lot. The investigation unfolded quickly as hundreds of officers worked across Ontario to solve the murders. Luckily, authorities recovered surveillance footage from Hamilton, showing Kauldhar following Bilic moments before his death. Kauldhar was tracked down and arrested at a Burlington hotel on October 3rd. Kauldhar, a straight-A student raised by 2 loving parents in Innisfil, Ontario, had a promising upbringing, but reportedly struggled with drugs and mental health issues in recent years. Former friends described her as a high-achieving student and athlete in her youth, but recalled her downward spiral in college. Police are still investigating and have appealed to the public for any additional information on Kauldhar's crimes and background to help shed further light on this chilling murder spree. On October 1st, Toronto police received a call about an unresponsive woman with visible injuries in her home. When police arrived at the scene at around 2 p.m., they discovered the body of a deceased woman who was roughly 60 years old. The next day, Niagara Falls police responded to an afternoon call about a disturbance in a parking lot near John Allen Park. At the scene, the police discovered the body of 47-year-old Lance Cunningham. A day later, Hamilton police received a call about an unresponsive man in a parking lot at 209 McNabb Street. There, police found 77-year-old Mario Bilic, a retired Catholic schoolteacher, with significant injuries consistent with a stabbing, according to reports. Tragically, Bilic passed away from his wounds at the hospital. Niagara Police Chief Bill Forty stated that the attacks seemed random. There were no connections between the 3 victims, and the last 2 victims were both going about their business when they were attacked. However, police believe the accused knew the first victim killed in Toronto, who has been identified as Kauldhar's roommate. Despite all of the crimes occurring in separate cities, investigators were quick to link them all together. Investigators were able to link the Hamilton homicide to the recent murder in John Allen Park in Niagara Falls, determining the suspect matched the description in both cases, a press release explained. An additional link was made to the active homicide investigation from October 1st in Toronto. With over 100 investigators working on the case across Ontario, It wasn't long before they discovered evidence pointing to Sabrina Kauldhar. Authorities recovered surveillance footage recording Mario Bilic's last moments. The footage showed Bilic exiting the social event he was attending and walking toward the parking lot. Following him was Sabrina Kauldhar. Later footage showed her running from the scene only minutes before the 911 call was made. With this information, police tracked down the 30-year-old and arrested her at a Burlington hotel on October 3rd at 5:45 p.m. Meanwhile, security footage at a Giant Tiger grocery store in Burlington showed an unnamed woman purchasing clothes that Kauldhar was later seen wearing. Police have not clarified whether this woman is an accomplice or a victim, but she has been found alive. As for Sabrina Kauldhar, the police made a public appeal asking for any information about her. According to friends and social media, Kauldhar was raised by two dentists in Innisfil, Ontario. A high school friend recently spoke to police, telling authorities that Kauldhar had a privileged upbringing but fell down a dark path. "I knew her in high school well. Parents were both dentists," the friend told the Toronto Sun. "She was a straight-A student and very active in sports, played high-level hockey, and did figure skating when she was young. In college, Kauldhar got caught up in the wrong crowd and began developing issues with drugs and mental health problems, all of which worsened after her mother's death in 2020. I haven't been in contact with her really at all since about 2015, and even then it was her trying to ask for money, and I just said no and hadn't heard anything since," the friend stated. Police are still asking for any information from the public about Sabrina Kauldhar and her disturbing crimes. High school junior Cassie Jo Stoddard had the world ahead of her in 2006, when her life was suddenly cut short by two of her classmates, Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper, who wanted to become world-famous killers. On the night of September 22, 2006, in Pocatello, Idaho, two aspiring serial killers viciously stabbed their 16-year-old classmate to death. Their motive for the killing was to imitate the cult horror movie Scream and to go down in history for their heinous crimes. Though Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk only committed one murder from their death list, the Scream killers succeeded in their macabre goal. Cassie Jo Stoddard was brutally murdered by Draper and Adamczyk, who then proceeded to record themselves celebrating what they had done.
Just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like it wasn't even real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
It's okay. Okay, let's buy movie tickets now.
Okay.
Come on. Goodbye.
No.
Goodbye.
Draper and Adamczyk had also filmed themselves plotting the murder, and they even captured footage of Stoddard at school just hours before they killed her. The video evidence helped authorities prove the teenagers' guilt and put them in prison for life. Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk met at Pocatello High School, and they became fast friends over their shared interest in film, according to reports. They enjoyed watching horror movies together, and Scream was one of their favorites.
Mine too.
Our locker. Got my Halloween
Pretty
stuff.
fucking sweet, isn't it?
My trench coat.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's decently sweet. Got my smokes here.
Well, I'm gonna like...
Look at those little legs.
What a fat egg. Let's go.
In September 2006, at the beginning of their junior year, they decided to make their own film. It would document their attempt to emulate the masked killer in Scream by picking off their classmates one by one. The boys created a death list of potential targets, and Cassie Jo Stoddard was at the top of it. On September 21st, Draper and Adamczyk filmed themselves plotting Stoddard's murder.
We're here in his car. The time is 9:50, September 22nd, 2006. Unfortunately, we have the grueling task of killing our two friends, and they are right in that house just down the street.
We just talked to them. We were there for an hour. But
We checked out the whole house. We know there's lots of doors. There's lots of places to hide. I unlocked the back doors, it's all locked. Now we just gotta wait. And yeah, we're really nervous right now, but you know, we're ready.
We're listening to the greatest rock band
We've
ever,
waited for this for a long time.
Pink Floyd, before we commit the ultimate crime of murder.
We waited for this for a long time.
A long time.
We'll stay tuned. Just killed Cassie. We just left her house. This is not a fucking joke.
I'm shaking.
I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body just disappear. Dude, I just killed Cassie. Oh, fuck. That felt like it wasn't even real. I mean, it went by so fast.
Shut the fuck up. We gotta get our act straight.
It's okay. Okay, let's buy movie tickets now.
Okay.
Come on.
No.
Goodbye.
Draper began the recording by saying, "We found our victim, and sad as it may be, she's our friend. But you know what? We all have to make sacrifices. Our first victim is going to be Cassie Stoddard and her friends." They knew Stoddard was going to be house-sitting at her aunt and uncle's house the following night, and they planned to kill any of her friends who were around as well. When Draper suggested picking them off one by one, Tori Adamczyk responded, "Why one by one? Why can't it be a slaughterhouse?" Brian Draper replied by saying, "We're going to go down in history. We're going to be just like Scream." And the very next night, they carried out their scheme.
We're going for a high death count.
We're not going not to get caught, Brian. If we're going for guns, we're just gonna end it. We're just gonna grab the guns and get out of there, kill everybody and leave.
We're going to make history. We're gonna make history.
For all you FBI agents watching this, you weren't quick enough.
We were quick enough and you weren't smart enough. And we're going over today, Nixon's house. We're gonna go snoop around over there and try to see if she's home alone or not. And if she's home alone, splat! She did.
Don't put your humor into this, Brian.
I'm not putting humor into it. Yep. People will die. And then memories will fade.
Memories will fade. I wonder what movie you got that from, Brian.
Myself. That was for myself.
No wonder it was so lame.
Okay, we're on our way, and I'll let you stay tuned. We're almost there.
On the night of her murder, Cassie Jo Stoddard invited her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, to spend the evening at her aunt and uncle's house with her. She also invited over Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, and the four decided to watch a movie. The boys soon left, telling Stoddard and Beckham that they were going to go to the local movie theater instead. But before they did, one of them sneaked downstairs and unlocked the basement door. Rather than go to the movies, Draper and Adamczyk changed into dark clothes and white masks and grabbed the knives they purchased from a pawn shop several weeks earlier. They then crept back into the house through the basement door and tried to lure Stoddard and Beckham downstairs by making loud noises. Their initial plan failed, as instead of heading to the basement to investigate, Beckham called his mom to ask if he could spend the night with Stoddard. She said no, but she told him that Stoddard could come to their house. Stoddard declined, as she didn't want to let her aunt and uncle down, and Beckham's mother picked him up at 10:30 p.m. Shortly after, Draper and Adamczyk went upstairs and stabbed Cassie Jo Stoddard approximately 30 times. 12 of the wounds proved to be fatal, striking the right ventricle of her heart, and she quickly bled out. The boys then fled the scene. They returned to their car around 11:30 p.m. and filmed their reactions to what they had just done. Brian Draper told the camera, "I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body. It just disappeared. Dude, I just killed Cassie." Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were interviewed by police several days later after Beckham informed authorities that they had been some of the last people to see Stoddard alive. Draper stuck to the story that he and Adamczyk had gone to the movie theater, but he couldn't describe the plot of the film they'd reportedly seen. Neither could Adamczyk. Brian Draper broke first. He told police that it was all supposed to be a joke, and that he was surprised when Adamczyk actually started stabbing Stoddard. Draper led authorities to Black Rock Canyon, where the teens had disposed of their clothes, masks, weapons, and camera. They had attempted to burn the videotapes of their grisly confession, but investigators were able to recover the footage and use it to charge the boys with murder. Although they were both under the age of 18 at the time, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk were tried as adults. The incriminating video was shown to the jury during Draper's trial. His defense claimed that the tape was only recorded for a horror movie that the teenagers were planning to make. The boys were both found guilty of homicide and conspiracy to commit murder and received the same sentence: life in prison. The Scream killers were caught before they were able to carry out any more murders from their extensive death list. Sadly, justice came too late to save Cassie Jo Stoddard.
I'm getting you on tape, okay? Say hi, please.
Hi.
Okay, see ya. Dixon's house. It's clear out there in the pasture. We've already snooped around her house a couple times. She's not home, so we're gonna go to the church over there, and we're gonna call a girl and a guy named Cassie and Matt. They're our friends, but we have to make sacrifices. So I feel tonight it is the night, and I feel really weird, inside my stomach and stuff, and I feel like I want to kill somebody. I know that's not normal, but what the hell?
I feel we need to break away from normal life.
How bright is this light?
British Dr. Thomas Kwan, 53, who donned a wig, fake facial hair, and a medical mask to secretly poison his mother's former partner, has pleaded guilty to attempted murder. Kwan reportedly sent his mother's then-partner, Patrick O'Hara, forged letters claiming that he was overdue for a checkup. Kwan then visited the man at his home, wearing a disguise so his mother and O'Hara wouldn't recognize him, to administer a poison made to look like a COVID-19 vaccine to O'Hara. Thomas Kwan pretended to be a community nurse delivering booster shots and injected Patrick O'Hara with a toxic substance, likely a pesticide. O'Hara, 72, was given a toxin which caused a rare and life-threatening flesh-eating disease. O'Hara survived the ordeal, but he developed necrotizing fasciitis, a potentially fatal flesh-eating bacterial infection. Now Kwan is set to be sentenced for his disturbing crimes. Thomas Kwan was a family doctor in Sunderland, England, but he passed himself off as a nurse when he put this devious plan into action. Kwan forged documentation, used a vehicle with fake license plates, and disguised himself with head-to-toe protective clothing, tinted glasses, and a surgical mask to visit the home in Newcastle that O'Hara shared with Kwan's mother, Jenny Leung, in January. Almost immediately, O'Hara became seriously unwell, and he was soon admitted to the hospital, where he presented the staff with the letters he had received from the disguised Kwan. Realizing the correspondence was bogus, hospital officials contacted the police. O'Hara needed numerous operations, including skin grafts to repair the extensive damage the poisoning caused to his body. During the ensuing investigation, the police identified Kwan as a suspect. They determined that the doctor had driven from his home in Ingleby, Barwick, to a hotel in Newcastle on January 22, 2024. The morning of the incident. They also found that he put fake plates on his vehicle in an attempt to hide his identity. He was arrested at his home, where police also found a poisoner's handbook and a guide on murder investigations on his computer. They also uncovered several files about lethal poisons and avoiding detection. Thomas Kwan previously admitted to a charge of administering a noxious substance, and now he has pleaded guilty to attempted murder too. Thomas Kwan's actions were utterly despicable, said Detective Chief Inspector Jason Henry. He used his experience as a doctor to deceive the victim into thinking the medical appointment he had arranged was genuine before administering the poison, which has caused him unimaginable pain and suffering. In court, prosecutors identified a possible motive for Kwan. He was reportedly concerned about his mother's will, in which she left her house to O'Hara rather than Kwan. Mr. Kwan used his encyclopedic knowledge of and research into poisons to carry out his plan, said prosecutor Peter Makepeace in court. The exact toxin Kwan used is still yet to be identified, and though he admitted guilt in the crime, he made no efforts to come clean about the specific poison he injected. While the attempt on his victim's life was thankfully unsuccessful, the effects were still catastrophic, said Christopher Atkinson, head of the Complex Casework Unit for Crown Prosecution Service Northeast. At a time when Kwan could have assisted medical staff by identifying this substance, He instead made no comment to the questions put to him in police interview, allowing the victim's health to further deteriorate. Makepeace summed up the case best, saying simply, "Sometimes the truth really is stranger than fiction." What are your thoughts on these cases? Do you think Sabrina murdered the trio because of some mental health problems, and her mother's death just fueled the fire? Or there's more to it than what we know? Thankfully, Brian and Tori were caught before they were able to carry out any more murders. I mean, if they did that to their own friend, can you imagine what they would have done to a stranger? Thomas had so many chances to stop his plan and amend things with his mother, and hopefully she would have included him in her will, or at least talk about it like adults since his job is to save lives. Like always, rest in peace to all the victims. Don't forget to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. If you like my content, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.